So I don't remember exactly when I first learned about Taoism. I think it's common for some people to encounter it in their preteen or early teen years. That's when I did, somewhere in that time frame. And as is common for people in that time of life, I could be impulsive and overly concerned with being correct, perhaps a little prideful, just for a start of my failings at that age. And so for me, and I think for a lot of us, the spiritual journey starts with our faults. It starts with what we lack, or what we think we lack anyway. Because we're looking for something, that thing that we're missing, or perhaps for some remedy for something we don't like about ourselves, or how to fix the world. So I was, to keep going in this vein for a second, as a youth, prone to reacting and sometimes overreacting. Maybe you know some teens like that. And sometimes I reacted really badly. I would get mad, I would blow up over upsetting, but like sort of relatively small upsetting things. And so I think Taoism offered me a way to think about this very differently. The central idea, and here I confess that I'm not like a great expert in Taoism, but I'm going to do my best here from my perspective. The central idea of Taoism is that there is a unifying order and a flow to all of existence. This is called the Tao, which, as I said earlier, translates to the way in English. Taoists strive to embody Day, which is the human embodiment of Tao. That is, you will lead one's life in accordance with that underlying reality of the universe. The classic example of this is that of a river with a strong current. If you fall into a river, you might begin struggling your hardest to swim back to where you fell in, to grab back onto the boat or the bridge that you fell off of. But this is usually a mistake, because fighting the current will take all of your energy. You probably won't actually be able to get back there. It will tire you out, and you'll drown eventually, right? Taoism says that there's a different idea, and this is one that is backed up by people who are experts about rivers. If you relax for a second, observe the river, get in a good position, and start heading for the bank at an angle, letting the current take you, but also working your way towards a place where you can get out, you will be much more successful about this. You can find a place to get out and walk back to where you were, which is a much safer strategy. Lost my place here just a second. Okay, there we go. Or to give another aquatic metaphor, which I'm totally out of my depth on, but so if I get this a little bit wrong, forgive me. But I am reliably told that you cannot sail straight into a headwind. But if instead you tack your sails, that is, you zigzag, you can use the wind to push you sideways, but also a little bit forward. And then you go the other direction, also a little bit forward. And so it takes a long time and a lot of distance, but you can sail into the wind. But not by going directly against it, but rather by using its own power to help you. Or you could imagine different trees trying to resist a storm. Some are huge and strong and use their sort of power and size to resist wind or rain. But they might be so stiff that they ultimately break, whereas a much smaller tree with less mass has less to push against for the wind. With a more flexible trunk and branches, it can bend over, but after the storm is gone, pop right back up with no damage, or virtually none. One of the things I really like about Taoism is they do really good metaphors. So I hope one of those appealed to you, and if not, there's like dozens and dozens more you can look up online. Because understanding the way, the Tao, I have found not to be easy. I picked today's reading not in part because it really speaks to me very deeply. I mean, it does. That's part of why I picked it. But also because I find it very confusing. how can you do anything by not doing anything, right? I mean, that's one of the things you could take away from that reading. We'll get back to this in a moment, though. Much of Taoism is things that are common to many religions. It holds up virtues like compassion and humility, frugality, or we might say simplicity, actually, to be a little more correct. These are good. I'm for all of these virtues, but I think you could find them in many traditions. These are common sort of perhaps human virtues, we might say, or at least things we think should be virtues, whether we actually achieve them or not. And so the interesting and distinctive thing for me about Taoism is that central idea I talked about, to live in harmony with the Tao is the goal. And part of that is acknowledging that there are many things in our lives, within ourselves, within our world, that are in a careful balance, and not a sort of constant balance, but one that changes and is dynamic and comes back and forth between two opposites. Taoism talks about this in several ways, but the most prominent one you've probably heard of is the idea of yin and yang, which are two opposing but ultimately complementary forces in the world. And you can see these in so many situations. Yin and yang are talked about in terms of day and night, or of active and passive approaches, or hot and cold. Too much of any of these is not great. Too little of any of them is not great. You have to find some, again, shifting but dynamic place between them, some sort of sense of balance. And understanding the need for this balance and what that looks like in the world, how you can possibly work with it in your own life, all of that is the work of at least one lifetime, probably many more. I want to take a slight turn here, but stay with me for a second. I received a scholarship, I mentioned this before, when I was in seminary, to go study Shinto, another prominent Eastern religion. I studied it in Japan at Tsubaki Grand Shrine, which is one of the great shrines there of Shinto. It's been there for more than 2,000 years. I think I haven't ever mentioned here, at least, one of the reasons why I was initially interested in this. Obviously, there was the chance to travel and experience a new part of the world, to see a different culture. I knew just a tiny bit about Shinto before applying, but there was something about that that particularly interested me, because the contemporary form of Shinto and a 2,000-year-old religion has changed a lot. It will not surprise you, over 2,000 years. But the contemporary form, the form that's practiced today, and this is true of many aspects of Japanese culture, is a syncretic thing. That is, it has taken in aspects of other cultures, of waves of immigrants, in Japan's case, mostly waves of immigrants from Korea and China, what we now know as Korea and China. Waves of immigrants and their new ideas have been brought over for centuries and millennia. For instance, in Japan, Buddhism and Shinto are closely related and in many ways interwoven. And often, most, in fact, Japanese people practice some or all aspects of both of those traditions. There is a very old joke that Japanese people get married Shinto and die Buddhist, because Shinto do better weddings and the Buddhists do better funerals. And the real joke about that is that it's not a joke. That actually is what happens. A lot of people do a Shinto wedding ceremony and a Buddhist funeral, and that's not seen as strange at all. That's very common. And in fact, the two traditions have borrowed a lot of ideas from one another, at least in their Japanese forms. So to get back to Shinto for a second, one of the syncretisms, the interweavings, that I was most interested in was that of Taoism and Shinto, because Shinto was deeply affected and changed by Taoist ideas that came from China. Similarly, Shinto and Zen Buddhism have a strong history of exchange and syncretism. If you have ever thought, and I don't know how many of you know anything about Zen Buddhism, but if you have ever thought, gee, Zen Buddhism in particular sounds a lot like Taoism or Confucianism, that's not a coincidence. They took a lot of ideas from those traditions, and people have created something new out of that. All of these share a lot of history and ideas from long, long exchange. So Shinto is less well known in the West than some of those other traditions, but it also has a long history with them. Tao, as I've said now several times, means the way. And To, the second half of Shinto's name, is a cognate. It's from the same linguistic roots. It also means way. Shinto literally means the way of the kami, or the kami's way, I guess, to put it the right order. Kami are the gods or great spirits in the Shinto belief system. So Taoism and Shinto too often seem simple on some level. Like one should be able to read the Tao Te Ching and understand it and follow the precepts easily. But as with so many things, the more you know, the less you start to feel certain about what you know. Interesting things in this world, this universe, are too complex and complicated to be boiled down into a few simple thoughts or ideas, which I find is something worth remembering in these days of political slogans and phrases that fit on hats, to put it one way. And there's a scientific, if you're a scientific bent, a cognitive concept about this called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which says basically that the more you know or the more skilled you are, the less confident you are about what you know. And conversely, people who are poorly informed or poorly skilled about something tend to think that they are extremely good at it relative to their actual skill level. In other words, at first you think you know everything, but the more you learn, if you continue in something, the more complex and weird things get, and you appreciate more what you aren't sure of. Now, having said that, I'm not an expert in cognitive sciences, so somebody is going to tell me that I am overconfident in how I just explained that, which is probably true. So yes, much of Taoism seems almost obvious or very natural. If you've perhaps seen a few quotes or whatever, you might have said, oh yeah, I get that. That makes sense. But it's been my experience that the more you learn, the more mysterious and complex things get. And I think that's wonderful. So I wanted to share a little bit about some contradictions. We heard a few perhaps in our reading today. But these things that don't at least initially make sense. And so I want to read part of the first verse of the Tao Te Ching to you, which is, the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the origin of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of myriad things. Thus, constantly without desire, one observes its essence. Constantly with desire, one observes its manifestations. These two emerge together but differ in name. The unity is said to be the mystery. Mystery of mysteries, the door to all wonders. Actually, this is a really good translation of this. I don't read Chinese, but I've read a number of translations, and this one really speaks to me. And man, there is a lot to unpack there that I don't have time to get into today. There's so much, but one of the things that really speaks to me is embracing the mystery, being willing to be uncertain about things, being willing to know that there is more for us to know. One of the things I love about Taoism and about Shinto, and I think this is true of any serious religious practice, is that you go through phases with it. You go through periods where you are unsure of your life or everything, and so you want to know more. You want to seek comfort and information. There are times when you are so sure of yourself that you want to spend more time with your religious practice and really dive into it. And sometimes that makes you actually more uncertain about it and having to wrestle with it. And this is the spiritual life, for better or worse. It's not a problem we need to fix. It's a journey or a way, we might say, that continues on and has its ups and downs its growth periods, and its struggles. You don't reach the end and having solved everything. It's like a video game you can keep playing over and over again in different ways, different times, different levels of difficulty. So I hope today that whatever your source of wisdom and inspiration, I hope it is that for you, that it can be a source of great comfort, that it can be something you return to again and again for certainty, for uncertainty, for new life, for grief. And I hope that whatever your spiritual practice is, that it inspires you to be uncertain in the very best way. May it be so.